Older Redditors, what do young people get completely wrong about past decades? They understand restaurants had smoking sections, and that bars and clubs were filled with cigarette smoke. But I don't think many understood how pervasive smoking was. There were ashtrays and people smoking literally everywhere. Jury boxes had ashtrays in front of every juror. Judge smoked. Lawyers smoked. The gallery smoked. You smoked on planes, trains, buses, taxicabs, and all transportation centers. You smoked at the library, the PTO meetings at schools, the town hall and all city offices. Hell, you could smoke at the courtyard at my high school as a student. You smoked in the elevator and on the escalator, the mall, sports venues, doctors' offices, hospitals, the movies, the plays, opera, concerts and every other public performance. A non-smoker would come home often smelling like smoke. One was constantly surrounded by smoke. It was insane. Probably underestimating how few choices there were. Today, it seems like everything imaginable is available in a variety of sizes. Delivered to your door overnight. Catalogs and mail order. With 46-week delivery. Malls were the best thing ever. All the stores in one place. And not downtown. How common drinking and driving was. Until MAD came along. People did this routinely. It's where one for the road originated. Probably just how often you had to accept that you couldn't find out the answer to something. If you had a question, you could ask your family, maybe your friends, maybe your teachers, and your last chance was to check the library. But if the library didn't have the answer, then you just had to accept that you weren't going to get an answer. Or you'd have to hope to come across that answer someday in the future. Now you just ask Google and get 10 answers in just seconds. I am definitely an older Redditor. Born in 1949. What today's young people don't appreciate is how, growing up, we had to invent our own sources of fun. There were no video games, which I enjoy playing. Just 3 channels on a black and white TV. We didn't get color until 1967. And no real entertainment aimed at kids. All we could do is interact with each other and play established games like marbles or maybe an organized sport like Little League Baseball. There was a baseball diamond, overgrown with weeds, across the street from us. But mostly we played in the woods that surrounded us, climbing trees pretending to be pirates or some such. I loved the book mobiles that would visit my street. And I must have read every biography, all bound in blue covers, in my elementary school library. It was a different era with many fewer distractions and much more time for sustained imagination. Being a different place and time, we developed different skills for interacting with the world and each other than young people do today. Was it better? That's hard to say. We tended to have an insular view of our own little world. While today it is hard to escape what is happening everywhere on Earth. We had to wait days for a letter to arrive. And we shared a party line with our neighbor's phone. That is a far slower pace than today's instantaneous texting culture. Yes, I do text. Some things have been lost while others have been gained. That's the way it always will be. Just wait. My grandmother smoked basically every second she was awake from age 1375. She loved it and said she would rather die than stop. She smoked in her house and car, even in bed. I used to stay with her a lot. I went to a strict private school for high school. They were on campus off campus, which meant you had to conduct yourself the same way at home as at school. My parents went out of town for 2 weeks. I had to stay with my grandparents. I was about 15 and knew I smelled like an ashtray. What could I do? I had to stay with her. Even my hair smelled like it. So I'm at school and I get called out of class and sent to the principal. He explained to me that several teachers had complained that I smell like smoke, and he knows I have been smoking before I come to school. I told them I was staying at my grandparents' and my grandmother smoked non-stop, and that's why. They said that was not true because my hair smelled like smoke, and that only happens if you smoke. So they're about to suspend me. They call my parents. My parents had to tell them I was staying with my grandparents, and that's why. I was so embarrassed and self-conscious until my parents got back and I got to go home. Also, when we moved my grandparents to another house, we took down everything from the wall. Realized the walls are yellow from smoke. Where something had hung, the walls were bright white. I often wondered what my grandmother's lungs looked like after this. People say that the 80s were all about consumerism, which is true, but the products were well made and fixable. Towns had repair shops for everything. You just didn't buy a disposable TV. If it broke, you took it in to get fixed. Nowadays, if your TV breaks, it's tossed and you get a new one. Maybe not everyone's experience, but for me there was casual violence everywhere. Smacking kids was not only tolerated but expected. Hit by parents, friends' parents, random adults in the neighborhood, teachers, etc. Then you'd get beat for making the teacher hit you. What will the neighbors think was real? How hard it was to get porn. You had to go buy it in person. Mail order porn was a possibility, but then the postman knows. They always knew. The 80s was not day glow. The 80s was brown and gray with a dash of pastel towards the end. 9/11. Younger people don't truly understand how the entire nation froze in shock. Security was never the same. For example, traveling via air was never the same afterwards. I missed the days of walking my friends' family to the gate and drop them off. Kids think Y2K was a joke, but the panic was real. People legit thought computers would end us. Landline telephones had seriously great audio quality. Better than anything for remote conversation today. In my opinion, I distinctly remember being a teenager and just talking on the phone with someone late into the night, hearing them breathe and sigh, hearing their every little sound. There wasn't the lag and the noise cancelling and the high compression that ruins telephony today. It was a much purer way to feel like you were closer to someone than anything we have today. The 80s was not colorful. It was brown and burnt orange as far as the eye could see. Early 90s was the colorful time. Goths today have no idea how easy they have it. We had to raid our grandma's closet, go to thrift stores and learn to sew and alter lol. I also don't think people know just how important safety pins were as an accessory. We had at least 5 in every pair of pants. We also pierced ourselves with them. Early mid-90s. I never knew there were piercing shops. At 40 I still have my nose piercing I did with a safety pin in 8th grade. In junior high I colored my fingernails black with a Sharpie. BC black nail polish was not really a thing you could buy. Colored hair dye? Nope, we had Kool-Aid. I think younger people don't fully grasp what older generations mean when we say our parents had no idea what we were doing and really didn't care. I see so many young folks angry about their parents not helping with grandkids or going no contact with their parents, and they don't grasp that many boomers and General X's raised themselves. Dinner was provided, and basic needs were met. Shelter, clothing, yearly medical physicals, but so little of everything else. I'm a Gen X and so many of my friends are only now realizing how bad life was for some of our boomer parents as they are suffering from dementia and their sexual and physical assaults are coming to light. That feminism isn't some moldy concept from the distant past. In the U.S., sexual discrimination in education wasn't outlawed until 1972. which just happened to be the same year unmarried women were legally allowed access to birth control. Additionally, prior to 1974, women were not allowed to have credit cards or loans in their own names. They were simply authorized users of their husbands' credit cards. Some employers also required married women to have their husband's permission before they were offered employment. When people talk about how women in the 1950s and 1960s stayed married even when the marriage was clearly rocky, it was less about devotion and more to do with the lack of equal access to education, work and finances. The divorce rate skyrocketed in the 70s, but not because women were suddenly wanton and looking for a good time. It was because they were no longer forced to remain in a bad marriage as a matter of financial survival. It's mostly that people tend to only have a pop culture understanding of past times. Their idea of the 80s, when I grew up, is far too distilled a version of the times to be reality. It just occurs to me. People seem to think those times were like a John Hughes movie. His movies actually captured the spirit of the times pretty well. Or, at least those of the socio-economic classes he depicted. Anyway, but real life in the 80s happened one day at a time. Whereas the movies, and younger folks' imagination of the time, was like the entire decade compacted into one Saturday afternoon in a highly stylized movie set of a boy's bedroom. And I'm not picking on anyone here. Of course you don't actually understand a time you didn't live in, any more than my generation understood the 1950s. Though I have to admit I feel flattered modern young people bother to remember us at all. The 80s and 90s were not a particularly dramatic time like the 1960s was. That's part of what made it so nice. We weren't being drafted. We didn't have an enormous culture war ripping us apart. The economy was relatively good and light years more accommodating than it is today. You had the freedom to just breathe and be who you wanted to be. It was in a sense an idyllic time. As close to idyllic as America probably ever came. The 1980s and 90s were the last, possibly best gasp of old America, before 9/11 skewed it into this deranged culture we're currently enduring. That's the real story here. But probably outside of the context of this question. It's just important for modern young people today to understand that you probably don't grasp how profoundly different America was before that boundary and pop cultural understanding of the time is divorced from reality if you don't have that understanding. Travel. Reading paper maps and scanning for roadsides and landmarks to guide you to destinations you have never been to. Half of my younger coworkers couldn't point north if asked without their phones. Journalism has changed. You used to be able to trust in the integrity of the journalist. Now they're interchangeable, and all we know is the network. It has changed the way we trust the new media, and it's not good. We shouldn't underestimate the danger of this change. The judge the things that we do out of context, and don't understand what we mean when we say that's the way things were back then. I grew up hearing stories of my uncles driving home drunk from the bar, and they were always told in a funny context. Then we started to realize as society that this was a real problem and work to change that habit, or at least make people understand it's a bad idea. Not once did I ever look back on my uncles and think they're assholes for driving home drunk. It was just the way things were back then.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Eracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.